Welcome back to the Resilient Pastor Podcast. Barna really cares about pastors and church leaders, and this podcast is one piece of a broader effort towards supporting leaders in the daily ins and outs of ministry. Stay tuned for more gatherings and webinars as part of the Resilient Pastor Initiative, aimed at encouraging and equipping pastors in this season. Glenn, Sharon, how are you guys doing?
So pretty good.
It's great to be with you guys. You know, I've been thinking, I have been snacking on something that someone introduced to me recently, and I think it's turned into a problem. Have you guys ever had frozen grapes before? Have you had frozen grapes before?
Come on, Rich. Come on, Rich. It's like asking me, have I stayed at a hotel before?
Really?
What?
Now, first of all, I want to hear about this because wait, how
often are you eating? Yeah, I have a lot of follow-up questions now.
First of all, Glenn, I'm offended. But listen.
That was my goal.
That was my goal. I am like, I can't believe it. So what I've been doing is I get the grapes. I wash the grapes now, right immediately. Usually I just wait. I wash them. I throw them in the bowl. 6 hours later, it's just, 25 grapes. I think I'm overdoing it. But so Glenn, you've been doing this for a long time?
Okay. So I'm overstating the case here. I've had it, but have I taken the time to do it at home? No.
Where are you doing it then?
So
yeah.
Well, at hotels, like I'm trying to think of like when I go to a hotel pool or whatever, they walk around and they serve you
frozen
stuff,
grapes.
Like a lot of times it's complimentary frozen.
What hotels are you staying at,
Glenn,
man?
I know you are staying at much nicer hotels.
No, I'm talking about like Palm Springs.
I've never heard of someone offering frozen grapes at a hotel.
I know we don't roll like that, Glenn.
Oh my. Okay. Well, Sharon, have you had frozen grapes before? Have you enjoyed it?
I have. I'm thinking the way you've sold it, I am feeling I need to like revisit this because I'm still kind of in the goldfish cracker phase where that's what we have on hand.
Okay.
So,
but you are raising a good point, Rich, that making it for yourself at home is really smart because it's a nice treat and you don't overdo it and it's not like candy, but it tastes like candy.
Yeah, I have been overdoing it though, I think. That's the problem because it's still high in sugar. So I've been overdoing it. Anyway, do you guys have any snacks or anything like that you go to? Because I've been going to the grapes. No, I mean, goldfish and crackers. Thank you, Sharon, for that one.
Profound. It's Greek yogurt for me, and I got to be in Greece with my family over the Thanksgiving break. Which this people may not know this, but in Greece they don't call Greek yogurt. They just call it yogurt.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
That one's free, guys. that one's free. But no, my snack of choice is Greek yogurt.
Greek yogurt. All right. Well, Glenn, you're going to be talking with Jay Kim today. Jay serves as the lead pastor at WestGate Church in Silicon Valley. He's the author of Analog Christian, Analog Church, Listen, Speak, and other books. And he hosts a Digital Examine podcast and has been the co-host of Barna's Making Space podcast as well. Glenn, what'd you guys talk about? What was the thrust of your time together?
Jay has become a really great friend, and not just to me personally, but to our church. Our churches have become friends. And actually, last year, kind of early or late summer, early fall, I went up there to speak, and we brought 4 or 5 of our team, and we extended it to have like kind of a day of mutual learning from one another, which I found to be so fruitful. And we continue to kind of try to share, insights. Both being in California, I think really is a helpful sort of thing. But one of the things that we're both really fascinated about, and that Jay and his team do such a great job of, is team health. Strategy, those kinds of things. And so I just wanted to ask you guys, actually, let's just start with this question. Are there rhythms that you guys do with your teams, with your staff as you begin a new year? What are some of is there a retreat? Is there a day away? What do you do?
So we take the week after Christmas off. And so we're coming into the new year with just a week of rest. So everyone's just recovered from Christmas and refreshed. And then pretty early in the year, we also have a staff retreat. And the purpose of that is multiple. That's a time for, teaching, just leadership training. It's also a time for vision casting. But most importantly, it's just a time for fun. Like, we really want to build in, and we don't just do this on our retreats. We have built in times of meals, fun things like, speaking of, just coming out of the Christmas season, for our staff Christmas dinner, one of Ike's favorite things to do is he's always in charge of games. And so he always does these minute to win it games where you're having to like pick up cotton balls with Vaseline on your nose, like those kinds of games. He loves those. And so that's become kind of his trademark, but lots and lots of fun on the retreat as well. Just lots of laughter is really filling for our team.
Yeah, for us, the start of the year, there's two things that usually take place. We usually do have a retreat with our entire staff. And that's for the purpose of getting us connected to God. And, in fact, the first half of our staff retreats are usually oriented around reflection, prayer, getting to Jesus. And then the second half is oriented around planning, strategy, taking a bigger picture perspective on our specific areas and what it means for the coming year. But then beyond that, I spend some time with what we call our strategic direction team, which is about 6 folks. And we're really mapping out over the next 6 months. So we think about it in 6-month intervals. What are the particular hopes and outcomes and areas that we can measure progress in our respective ministry areas? And so it's my opportunity to say, hey, these are some of the things that I'm seeing and some of the things I'm hoping for in our areas. What do you see? And let's talk about it. But that's how we usually start the year, thinking about January to June and then doing the rest afterwards.
That's so great. Now, for you guys, is your fiscal year, ministry year calendar like January to December, or is it like a July to June?
For us, it's January to December.
Sharon?
Ours is not. Ours, I don't think it is, actually. I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm not involved in that side of church leadership, but we do our annual planning in October. So that's when we map out all of 2025. And we're having budget conversations right now as well.
Yeah. So for us at Rock Harbor, it kind of the first piece of vision stuff is like October, we do an elders retreat, and there's, day one of that is more relational, but also educational in the sense of we're bringing them up to speed on some behind the scenes things of the church, maybe philosophy, that kind of stuff, and some development portions. And then day 2 is like, hey, point us in the direction here from a 40,000 feet level, of towards a particular horizon for the next year, and then maybe even the next 3 years. We kind of look at 2 vision horizons. But then January, February, we go away with just our lead team. So that's about 8, 9, 10 people actually now. It's so a little larger of a lead team. And that's when we kind of narrow it down and go, okay, what's our 1 or 2 initiatives that will shape the next ministry year? And then the staff gets going on ministry planning. But it's a helpful way to even enter in. But I like things, what you guys are saying here with the staff stuff for relationships, but then also the 6-month thing. I think these are all different ways for people to think about it. But the important thing is to create that intentional space for staff to connect, to be learning, to be growing, and to be aligned together, right? Obviously, it takes more than just a retreat in January. I want to zero in specifically just a little bit on team health. And Rich, maybe you can kick us off with this because you've shared quite a bit about pastoral rule of life, soul, and role, some of the things that you build into your check-ins and your systems with your team. How do you keep things, I don't want to say keep tabs on, but how do you continue to cultivate health in your teams?
One of the new things that we're experimenting with is taking particular values regarding our staff and having forward planning discussions around that. And so building into the very structure of our meetings, whether all staff, whether it's specifically connected to our pastoral team or any other ministry team area where we're meeting with some regularity, what are the 5 areas of values that we want to cultivate as a team? And then monthly, how do we focus on one of those particular areas and have conversations around that? tell stories around that, areas of where we're growing and areas where we might be stuck. We learned this a number of years ago when we went for our elder board. We started putting out what's called, our forward planning discussions, where we map out the entire year and say, for this month, what's the most important area that we need to have unhurried, easy conversation around. And so it might be, next gen, it might be our building, it might be a preaching series that we're going to be doing in the next 6 months or whatever it might be. Adopting that and our staff team as well, in terms of this month, what might be most important for us to have unhurried conversation and development around. That's one of the ways that we are seeking to have some of these values around team health, connecting them to Jesus and one another. That's been one simple way we're doing that.
So good. How about you guys, Sharon?
So I really love, I've heard Rich, you say this multiple times, holding together, soul and role when it comes to our staff. And that is a really succinct way of describing our philosophy as well, that we want to be really clear around expectations. We really want to be very clear around vision, goals, all of that. And so, when we meet with our staff, and our staff currently is divided so that Ike has part of the staff he meets with weekly or every other week, and then I have part of the staff that I meet with. And so, our meetings are often very logistical, but they always start out relational. Much of our one-on-one time is given to me just checking in with them as people and finding out what's going on in their families, what's going on in their hearts, like all of that, so that I have a sense for, what's going on in their interior world, so that I'm not just measuring their performance, but really caring for them as a person. And so that's something that we always want to communicate, so that, when we do have to have those hard questions around performance, that the groundwork has already been laid, that I'm not just your taskmaster. Like, I'm not here to just be a jerk. Like, I really do care about you as a person. And also, we have hired you to do a job. And so we are constantly holding those things in tension.
So helpful. Go ahead, Rich. You're going to add to that.
I was just going to say, I do think this has happened in our church for a number of years, and somewhat organically, but we often buffer in a little extra time for big strategy conversations, because the first 10, 15, 20 minutes are often about just checking in. And I just realized that's just, for us, a really high value of connection. I know I can be very tempted at the start of a meeting to say, all right, what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, what's confused, what's the most significant areas that we need to be talking about, and then miss out just the easy connection that often shapes a particular culture. And so for us, we've worked really hard, and in some ways we haven't worked really hard because it's the natural way of our culture. But I just need to call that out. I think there's something there for anyone who's trying to build in healthy teams. To what degree is there just unhurried, easy time of personal connection before we start saying, okay, let's shift gears here and let's talk about some areas of planning or strategy or things along those lines?
Because also we've found that having those relational conversations where we know we have a fuller picture of what's going on in our staff's lives is also helpful when something difficult is happening in the church and it hits them a certain way that hits like a pain point. And if we're only talking about the thing and not what this touched inside of you internally, because we don't have that kind of relationship and we haven't been having that conversation, then we're missing that entire piece of leading them well. And so those conversations also really serve when you're having to address pain points.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's funny because I have 5 direct reports, which is a lot. So those are the one-on-ones. But there's some people, maybe you don't have a big team or it's volunteers, or you don't have an office space. I understand that. But I just want to caution for those who do have an office space. I understand the need for a pastor to have a few days where you're away from the office, doing some thought work, thinking work, prayer, all of that stuff, meeting with people, of course, out in the community. However, it's been really helpful to me to have at minimum 2 days a week. It's usually more like 3, where I'm around the offices for unscheduled, leisurely
Mhm.
check-ins. And our office bay, is an open area that we call it the bullpen. And oftentimes, just walking around, hey, how's this going? How's your kid? What's happening here? Did you ever find an apartment? And sometimes it's work stuff. Tell me what's going on in this project. And I'm not trying to cross lines of management, but it is that little check-in, and it's the caring of people that is the X factor in how people work. I'd love to do a bit of a lightning round here, guys, just on like best practices that has helped your leadership or it just helped your team. Maybe it didn't come from you. Maybe it's a team member kind of developed this. And it could be a framework, or it could be a slogan that you say. And let's just each say one, and then we'll go around, see if we can maybe we do 2 rounds. And I'll start with one. Here's one that I learned from someone called an EBI, an even better if. And so we build it in as part of our feedback culture. We have a sermon circle every Tuesday morning, and we review the previous message, whoever was preaching. We say affirmations and we say EBIs. And part of the reason that's helpful is because nobody wants to offer a negative. But an EBI is, hey, if here's a few ways it could have been even better if. And so you build that language in, and now people use it in a variety of contexts. Okay, who's...
One of the things we do on a regular basis, especially in planning or just on one-on-ones, is these, and I already just alluded to it, these 4 helpful questions. It actually comes from the Patterson Center. I was trained in the Patterson Center some 11 years ago as a strategic facilitator in this year. But it's just what's right that we need to maximize, what's wrong that we need to change, what's missing that we need to add, what's confusing that we need to clarify. So what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, what's confused. And then out of that assessment, what are the 3 core areas or so that we need to pay attention to? It's really just about getting perspective before planning. And so that's been a really helpful tool that we've used over, I want to say, the last 15, 16 years.
Very good. All right, Sharon.
For us, one that we added into our weekly staff meeting, probably in the last couple of years, because it is so easy to get in. Like, we have a time of prayer, we pray for various requests in the church, and then we sort of would dive into, debriefing Sunday, talking about, what else going on. But now one of the first things we do is just to celebrate the wins and to make sure that we are actually celebrating what God is doing in our church. And that has also been really important for perspective and for morale and just the culture of our team as well.
Awesome.
Man, I want to keep going. Can we do one more round? You got another one in you? All right, I'm gonna start with one. Here we go, and I'll buy you some time. Okay, here we go. I'll buy you some time. This is one again that we've adapted. It's an acronym called RASCI, RASCI, and I think there's a few versions of this. But ours is: who's responsible, whose approval is needed, who's supporting this, whom do we consult, and whom do we inform? And I just used this the other day to actually bust myself on this, because we were planning a dinner and I didn't know who was in charge of it exactly. And so I went over to the designer and go, hey, this is the color of the coffee mugs that we want to give away to the dinner. And my executive pastor called me in his office very gently. He goes, are you sure you want to do this? I go, what? He goes, you sure you want to be changing the color of the coffee mugs we're giving away? I go, what are you talking about? And so we worked through the RASCI. Turns out I'm not the R who's responsible. I'm not the A who needed to approve everything. I was the C that needed to consult. And so anyway, it's just a framework that can help locate
It's a good one.
Boundaries of authority.
Yeah, I'll go second. There's something called EBIs that when we use, it's about like it's even better if there. Beyond that, though, there's also in my office at the church. There's 3 questions that I often ask from time to time. It's just, what must we do? What should we do? What could we do? It wasn't for me, but feel free to quote me. Those are 3 questions that have helped to get some good conversation going in our areas.
That's great. All right, Sharon, last one.
Oh my goodness. I have 0 acronyms, you guys. That's not my spiritual gift. Acronyms are not my spiritual gift. But the last thing that I've really been focusing on in the last year or so has just been the importance of building trust into my leadership and into our team culture as well. I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago. I was speaking at an event with Jenny Catron. Do y'all know Jenny?
I know
She's a consultant now. She has been an executive pastor in a number of churches, and now she consults on organizational culture. But we were talking about the importance of trust, and she was naming, and I love how just simple this was. She was naming how trust is earned through both character and competence. And how with pastors, one of the weak points is that pastors can have great character and they can be the best, and everyone loves them and trusts their character. But if you lack the competence, that also undermines the trust of your team. And I think that's a really important category, not just for lead pastors, but really for anyone in a position of leadership to be thinking in terms of building trust and building it not only through your character, but also through your competence. If you are consistent, if you are reliable, if you do what you say you're going to do, if you honor them, all of those things. And so not an acronym, but something that I've just been chewing on the last year.
I love it, Sharon. And I think what I love about all of this is they're all connected to the underlying principle that you can't let it live only in you. Like you have to say it. You have to externalize it. It could be a phrase or a talk, but if you don't externalize the soul of the organization, then it only lives in you. And then the default mode of the entire team is, let's go ask the pastor what they think. Let's go ask the leader what they want, And if we have frameworks or acronyms or sayings or slogans or verses or values, these are things that help us externalize the soul of the organization, makes it easier for everyone to be aligned and to run fast. Okay, so we're going to get to my conversation with Jay in just a moment, and I can't wait for you to hear it. But Jay and I were both at this event in November where we recorded with a team of amazing presenters, Carrie Newhoff, Nona Jones, Bianca Juarez, and several others, called The State of the Church. And it's an event that was put on together with the Barna team in partnership with Glue. And coming up soon is the State of the Church webcast. It's a completely free resource. And along with it is not just a webcast, but some amazing tools like the Church Pulse assessment tool. We've actually taken this assessment at Rock Harbor. It's a remarkable assessment tool. It gave us tremendous insight, and I'm recommending it to every pastor I know. And so you'll hear about that tool a little bit on the webcast, but you're also going to hear some incredible reaction on new data, new research on the state of the church, reflections from leading voices, experts, pastors, practitioners. And so sign up for the State of the Church webcast completely free. Go to stateofthechurch.com today. All right, now for my conversation with Jay Kim. Jay, man, it is so good to have you back on the show. Dude, listen, I want people to know before you start talking here. I just want people to know that A, you and I are friends in real life, IRL, as the kids say, and B, since moving out to the West Coast, 2.5 years ago, whatever, I have really gotten a chance to get to know you better. Been at your church a couple of times, had you down at Rock Harbor a bit, and our teams are learning from each other. So today, I want to talk about leadership, growth, development, teams, all of that, but not because you have a lot of good ideas about it. You do, but also, not only because you have a lot of good ideas about it.
Because I know.
but also because literally, genuinely, our team has been over to your church, WestGate, to learn from your team and multiple times. And so I think there's a lot here for our listeners to kind of almost overhear the two of us talking about some of this stuff. So welcome, Jay.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I hope, because you and I talk about this kind of stuff all the time, sending each other voice notes and emails and text messages and random questions about. You've been such a tremendous help to me and the work God is doing through you and your leadership at Rock Harbor. You know this, but I'm going to say it publicly now. We're just constantly watching, Rock Harbor and asking the question, man, what does that look like in our context? So, honored to have this chat with you, man.
That's awesome, man. When Barna was talking to pastors about their own kind of personal development, one of the questions was, what kind of resources or learning could you most benefit from in your life right now? And the number one response maybe this isn't surprising because, the number one response was not theology or that kind of stuff because maybe they've already gotten that training. The number one response from pastors was actually leadership development. 57% of pastors said the thing I need more learning, more resources on is leadership development. For your own journey, Jay, like how did you grow as a leader? How did you invest in your own development as a leader?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one, that data is really interesting to me because you and I both, were pastoring in the sort of like early 2000s rise of I mean, there were always mega churches, but
Sure.
that sort of classic traditional
Yeah.
modern Western going to the leadership events and stuff where there was a lot of borrowing from,
Mhm.
secular, here's the CEO of whatever company and he's going to give us leadership principles. But what's interesting is because I hear the same thing from leader friends of mine, pastor friends of mine. Man, I really need leadership development. That's the thing I'm looking for. But what I hear, the word leader is elastic. And I think what I'm hearing from them is not like I need more of the sort of secular CEO giving me 5 principles to growing my company or my church. But I think what I'm hearing from friends is much more of like an inside out sort of leadership development, a desire to grow healthy, not just grow big, grow deep instead of, not just grow wide, all those sorts of things. So for me, I think that's been a part of my journey is I just had the tremendous blessing and privilege of somehow finding myself in the room with several leaders over the course of many years who weren't even intending to teach me about leadership, but they modeled and embodied a sort of inside out, deep, not just wide type of leadership. So the church where I serve on staff now, I'm following up on the heels of a 20 years sort of legacy leader who's one of the best leaders I know. He just taught at our church recently and still consider him my pastor in many ways. And he's one of the best leaders I know, not because he talks a lot about leadership, but because he really tried to live, in the words of our mutual friend, Steve Cuss, he tried to live right sized. He was just very human and he was very comfortable in his own skin, still is. And I think because of that, I saw him model sort of leadership in the way of Jesus. That was really intriguing and enticing to me. I think about like Henry Nouwen's In the Name of Jesus, which is a leadership book, but you start reading it and you're like, this book has nothing to do with leadership. And then you realize, oh, it has everything to do with leadership. So I think having people like that was the thing that helped most because it framed all of the other practical resources and put them in their rightful place. They're really important, but I was able to see them through the lens of self-leadership in many ways. So yeah, really grateful for that.
Dude, that's really profound, Jay, because what you're saying is, yes, you can learn some, techniques, best practices, philosophy, how to do strategy, all that stuff from other books or, even the corporate world. But sometimes the thing that you can't pick up there is that deep inner life, maybe even the reflection on your insecurities, your unhealth, and to move towards wholeness and healing in that way so that you become really the leader that God designed you to be and not sort of the Saul's armor thing of somebody else's way, which maybe I think is the pressure that some pastors feel when they hear leadership development. They go, oh, I got to become visionary in a way that is outside of myself. And instead of saying, what's the way to be visionary within the frame and gifts and all of that God has given me? And it is this balance, isn't it? I mean, I'm curious how you would comment on this. Like, there's this balance between having a growth mindset that says, yeah, I can grow in that versus becoming inauthentic. And you go, you know what, that is not something that I actually carry. I mean, how do you discern that line?
Yeah, man, it's a great question. It makes me think of that famous Bonhoeffer quote from Life Together when he's talking about the church, and he says that those who love their dream of the Christian community more than the Christian community become destroyers of that Christian community. And I remember having this long stretch of my ministry life going to conference after conference, and conferences are great. Like they can be really helpful again if they're put in their rightful place. But I remember going to conferences deeply insecure and very aspirational and coming to a place where I realized I loved my dream of Christian leadership more than the actual sort of calling to Christian leadership that was specific to my life, and thereby became sort of a destroyer of that specific calling. Because I was just aspiring to be whoever I saw on the stage all the time. And I think that still holds true for me, is just to ask those questions every day. God, what is the thing you're calling me to do, me to be? And what is the thing you're calling our church to do and for our church to be? And can we just be faithful to that? So that sort of reference point has been helpful for me.
That's so good. I think, it seems like the necessary sort of outflow of the awareness of yourself and who God has designed you to be, and kind of, not creating some sort of false ideal or projected sort of standard. The necessary kind of outflow of that is then you go, well, you know what? It's going to take more than me. So I need a team. I talk often when I'm talking about this resilient pastor thing, one of the top the number one reason for pastoral discouragement is what people say is the immense stress of the job. But what that means is that those stacking expectations of all the impossible ideals. And the key is not to say, well, the job just doesn't have to require all that. Maybe, but really the answer is actually the job's going to require more than me, and it's going to require a team. And Jay, I know your team. I've met your team. I've had some glorious Korean barbecue with your team, with a number of your team. And I'm just like how, when you're building a team and you're looking for health in a team, let's just start by defining the terms. What is a healthy team?
Gosh, I mean, people far more qualified than me, you being included, is would be so much better to answer that question. I think just in our small context and our sort of corner of the world, so many things come to mind, all the sort of standard stuff, whether it's staff values and such. But when I think about team specifically, like the dynamics of a healthy team, the team itself as an organism, one of the things that's been helpful for us is to think about what we would call like aspirational chemistry. So what I mean by that is, we all have jobs, we all have job descriptions, we all have particular roles and responsibilities and tasks that we need to fulfill, but we're also humans, made a particular way with our own stories and proclivities and leanings and personalities and all of that. And it's dangerous to think, well, I have a clear job description, so the person's just going to execute and feel fulfilled and flourish and thrive executing this job description. So we've really tried to do some work in terms of navigating on the front end of any particular role on our team, whether there is aspirational chemistry, meaning what does this particular role on the team really require of the person fulfilling the role, and what sorts of leadership components are necessary to fulfill that role. And those leadership components, we try to find people for whom those particular components are natural and unforced. So you and I were talking about this right before we hit record, but on all of our sort of role descriptions on our team for every ministry role, we have 5 sort of leadership components. And they all have these little icons, these images that sort of show, in part, represent what those components are. So one is like motivational, that we have roles that there's a motivational leadership component. That's like when you lead from a platform, you motivate and inspire people toward a particular direction. That might be like a teacher, preacher, a number of different roles. We have a strategic leadership component, and that's like a systems role. It's like, man, I'll sit in front of a computer with a big old, Keynote file or spreadsheets and charts, and I'll map that out, and that really gets me going. There's a directional leadership component, which is really about vision. So people in your role, Glenn, my role would be high on the directional side, leading with vision. Here's where we are, define reality. Here's where we want to go, sort of define the road forward. There's a relational leadership component, which is about connection. A lot of sort of pastoral care roles. Our spiritual directors on our team need to be very high in this area. And then there's like a team leadership component, which is really kind of the galvanizer. That's what it's called in some other things people use. But it's about rallying people to a particular sort of task at hand. So the reason I share that is to say that's been a helpful tool for us to assess our team at large, but also specific teams. Like, what is this team intended to accomplish? And are the right leadership components represented on the team? It actually informs when we're even looking to make new hires, that it's not just, oh, we need a high school ministry director.
Mhm.
We're actually asking the question, wow, in our student ministries right now, we need a relational, directional leader. And when we look at it through that lens, we've watched teams sort of naturally gel because their aspirational chemistry just sort of works. It's really balanced. So that's one thing of many things that's kind of led to health for us.
Well, that thing is, to me, it's a game changer, because now we're not just talking about the jobs we need done or the competencies that are required to complete those jobs. Now you're talking about a leadership, a quality of leadership. And I also appreciate that you've expanded, even in, sort of built in, inherent in that model, is that you've expanded the definition of leadership. If leadership is at its core influence, the ability to influence others, then you're saying, well, we influence others in a number of ways. Sometimes it's motivational, sometimes it's directional, sometimes it's relational. I think you said strategic, and then team. Those 5 things, it's so important. And how many times do we hire someone for a position and we go, it just wasn't working, and it wasn't really because of culture or chemistry or competency, but maybe kind of, and then when it comes down to it, you're like, you know what, we needed someone who was more motivational, and they didn't have that. And they go, well, you didn't tell me you needed that, so I really, really love that. I wonder, let's keep going down this track for a little bit. So that's a little bit on the front end. I imagine that's useful in check-ins, evaluations, reviews, and all that sort of thing. You and I talked about a generational shift in leading and working as teams. One of the things that sticks out to me is you talked about the frequency of contact and feedback. What are you? I mean, you're in Silicon Valley. You have teams at different age demographics. What are you noticing generationally shift about what constitutes a good team to one type, person and versus another?
Yeah. Our executive pastor here, my partner in sort of serving this staff, who really well, Andy Gridley, he did so much work on this for over a year, just sort of studying, researching, talking to folks. And what we found, and what all the research has found, is that, to me, it felt counterintuitive, but basically emerging generations, emerging leaders, late millennials, and then Gen Z, and it seems like upcoming sort of Gen Alpha, I thought they wanted low control, high autonomy. Hey, dude, check in with me like once a year, maybe, and just give me the tasks and give me room to be creative and let me go. That was my assumption. It's like, man, let's just create tons of room, create kind of like the boundary lines of the sandbox, but make the boundary lines like really wide and just say like, go and create. And some of that is true. Absolutely. Like, the space to be creative and to create and innovate is absolutely true. But what we found on the ground, and what our research sort of revealed pretty clearly, is that emerging leaders are actually looking for much more consistent feedback loops, that they don't see it as a nuisance for their supervisor or director, or whatever language you use in your church, to jump in on a pretty consistent basis to check in, and then to ask those questions like, man, here's where we clarified, like, this is what success might look like for us right now in this season, or this is our sort of shared win, what's important now, or whatever it might be, or in your role, these are the sort of like tasks at hand. And here's how I assess kind of how things are going, and what do you think? And there was this like question that was given to us recently by somebody who was sort of coaching us on something. He's like, man, supervisors, it's such a great way to begin conversation about sort of feedback, maybe like critical feedback, even constructive criticism, by asking the question, hey, what do you think I am going to give you critical feedback on right now? Like what is your sort of
Man, I like that.
self-assessment of what's
Yeah.
happening? And so we've sort of instituted, Andy Gridley, our XP, has sort of instituted a pretty regular trimester review cycle. So every 4 months there is a review cycle. One is so once a year is a much more extended, and we use a digital platform that we use where the supervisor and the staff person can both sort of assess themselves, and then they see kind of how they assessed their performance. And then really what we found is like, it's just a conversation starter. And we have discovered that having something that seems so formal on the front end actually opens the floodgates for our team to have much more pastoral conversations on the back end.
Yes.
And so initially it was like, oh man, this is like a digital thing I'm filling out. But now our team loves it because that thing is just the front door. And then we enter into a much more pastoral, man, how do we help you get better? Or sometimes it's like, man, I'm struggling here because my family's really struggling with X, Y, and Z. And so that's sort of been a gift to be able to have really consistent feedback loops with our team.
I love that you're pointing out the emerging leaders thing, more frequent feedback loops, the quarterly kind of review as opposed to the one giant annual review. I want to add too, one of the things we do at Rock Harbor is we do one-on-ones, and a lot of companies do that, a lot of churches do that. That's not revolutionary. I think what I'm learning, and we're a staff of about 25, and then of course there's a lot of volunteers and all that as well. But I have 5 direct reports, which could be, for some of the people listening, could be like, man, that's a lot for someone in the lead pastor kind of position. But but the thing that makes it work for me, and the reason it works for me, is those are not managerial one-on-ones. So our executive pastor Kit, they go with him if there's like more operational questions, or that's, they can go to him for that. But why do I still build in these one-on-ones? And most of them are every other week, so twice a month. And it's exactly the stuff you said, Jay. It's the way to kind of just check in, read the temperature, take, to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on here? And you're going to hate this analogy because you're not you're a Giants fan. I'm a Dodgers fan. But there was this moment where the Dodgers manager talks about this, where he went in to go talk to his pitcher, his closer, and he said, I just needed to look in his eyes and see how he was doing. And if he felt he could finish it out, I was going to stick with him. And he did. And that's that whole thing of like, why the frequent contact thing. And I just want to maybe add to, Jay, like, you're analog church, analog Christian, so much of your work, it doesn't mean you're anti-digital. And yet these are the kinds of things that require high touch and human interaction, isn't it? I mean, like the whole mobile work from anywhere. Do we ever see one another? How are you navigating that in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, I don't accept the Dodgers World Series win. I'm just pretending. I'm pretending that it wasn't a thing. So, yes, I think that, those types of interactions, the ones that become sort of centering sort of anchors for our team, they're very difficult to have over FaceTime, or Zoom,
text,
or whatever.
Or Slack,
so yeah. So actually we've done, we're in, our church is in Silicon Valley. We've taken the model that a lot of big tech companies here have done. Like Apple is just right down the street for us. So at Apple, what they do is like Mondays and Wednesdays are super flex days. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, their teams are all on site. And we don't have those exact days because Fridays we work, Sunday through Thursday for most of our team. So for us, we have Wednesdays and Tuesdays, sort of like middle of the week. Wednesdays and Tuesdays are flex days. We ask our team to only use one of those a week with approval from their supervisor. And approval just means like pinging them like, hey, next week, I think Wednesday I'll work from home, or I'm going to work offsite. So yeah, one day a week our team is offsite, but the other days, Sunday, Monday, and Thursday for everybody. If you come into the office, everybody's there. And you know this, Glenn. Most people listening to this know this. Like the most special, unexpected, surprising interactions and breakthroughs, even, and ideas, they happen in those moments when you're just walking the hallway.
100%.
And
100%.
like it's like, hey, how's it
Yep.
going, man? And then boom, something magical happens. So and our team loves that,
Yep.
So we very much have a hallway culture.
Same. And I think you're right. The magic happens in those moments. And I think, we have Monday is definitely a flex day for in our context. I am typically studying or working from somewhere else on a Monday. But Tuesdays, we stack all of our staff-related meetings. Same with Thursdays, we stack them that way. And that's a practical way you can build this in, if for our listeners, if you don't want to have to, paperwork check every time, which day are you doing, just you stack all the regular kind of meetings or check-ins on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But I'll tell you, Jay, I'm talking to some lead pastors who were following the generation before us, who kind of took the model that the bigger your church got, the less present you were. And I just want to encourage a counter trend here that I'm hearing you say, and I think it's like actually the number of significant conversations that happen just because I'm around and someone says, "Hey, could I grab 5 minutes?" Is so important. I want to ask you about boards here in a minute, but I want to ask you if you want to add something to this. There's two kind of practical tools that we have become normal in our staff culture here at Rock Harbor. One is the EBI. It's the even better if, and I got this from some consultant, and so whether it's the sermon circle where we're reviewing the previous Sunday's sermon and previewing the upcoming one, or whether it's an event, we're always saying what was good and then what could have been even better if. And that just frees people up to give feedback, because nobody wants to be the negative person that says, I have a negative comment, but they might have some good feedback. The second one that one of our formation guys came up with is a what's up with that, and that's like a, hey, can I ask a what's up with that, and it's like one of the things, you add layers in your organization, whether staff layers or volunteer layers, people down the line, so to speak, don't know. They're like, why are we doing this? What do you have things like that at WestGate?
Yeah, those are so good. I knew about the EBI. We've talked about it before, but I love the what's up with that. I think I'm going to start using that around here. It just makes me think of that SNL sketch, with Kenan Thompson. It's so good. But yeah, I mean, we have a very similar thing. 10% better is the language we use. Hey, let's explore this thing, man. This was good. But where's the 10% better edge, and are there practical steps that we could take toward that 10% better? And then one of our staff values also is radical candor, which comes from that Kim Scott book from a number of years ago, which takes a lot of courage. But for anybody who's read that book, she juxtaposes radical candor, meaning you are clear, you are kind, but clear in your feedback, critical feedback even. But that radical candor is actually a gift when you juxtapose it with the other option, which is what she calls, I think, ruinous niceness, where she essentially says we can ruin each other with our niceness. It's like something didn't go right, or there's definitely a 10% better, but man, I don't want to ruffle feathers or step on toes. So all I'm going to do is be nice. Like, oh, dude, that was great. High five. And radical candor comes in both forms, is what she says. Like, critical feedback has to be kind and it has to be clear. And that encouragement, actually, radical candor is also like encouraging when there was a win or when there was a surprising success or something, is to be specific and timely so instead of like, hey, dude, Glenn, you're awesome, man. It's like pretty general. It doesn't really mean anything. But instead, it's like, hey, Glenn, when you checked in with me last week in the hallway and you just randomly asked me how I was doing, that meant so much, because I've been going through this thing, and you said this one line that has stuck with me, man. It's really reverberating, and God's using it. That sort of specific and timely sort of feedback loop. So we've tried to really instill that in our team, and we're slowly watching it happen, and it creates these bonds, this trust equity in these bonds. bonds between team members that I think goes such a long ways, becomes fuel in the tank, I think.
Dude, that is so good. There was this stat in the State of Your Church study that Barna did. 62% of churches scored themselves high in team health. But, the specific questions were things like, I have a clear expectation of my role. There's good trust. I think that's great. But I think, we can nudge that number higher than 62% A. And B, I think you're adding some layers to this, like this thing about candor, this thing about different kinds of leadership, I think is so, so helpful. Ah, man, I really want to ask you about boards. Do you think you got 60 seconds of wisdom about boards, Jay? Because here's the stat. I'll set this up. Like the people, 48% of the pastors who've considered quitting, so almost half, feel as though it's because the board of their elders support them. In other words, half of them don't feel supported. Now, for pastors who have not thought about quitting, 75% feel supported. So, in other words, if we're putting this together, it means the lack of board support or strong board support is connected to the feeling of discouragement. I know you have a great relationship with your board, with your elders. Is there a little bit of wisdom you could give us to say what someone could work on to improve that?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have a lot of wisdom. I can share just my experience. One, this is going to sound overly simplistic, and everyone already knows this, but I cannot reiterate enough. Agendaless meals are like such a game changer. So I actually have
Meals
it
without
on
an agenda.
Yeah, I have it
yeah.
on my task list, my ongoing task list that is on my computer screen right now. It's a recurring task that once a quarter, Andy, our executive pastor, and I, we get together for dinner with a couple of our board members. Our chair is always included in that. And we always, he's like a wine connoisseur. So he always will pick, it's kind of a fun thing we have. He picks a restaurant, and then he has a small vineyard, and so he brings one of his bottles of wine, tells us the story. We share a bottle of wine together, have a great meal. We talk about our families and whichever other board members are joining us. We're just connecting. We're talking about the Golden State Warriors. Like we're trying to we're trying to have conversations that are really human, to remind one another at the end of the day, like we are called to this beautiful thing called the church, and we are called to steward and serve and lead her as best as we can collectively as a team. But we do that as just human beings, like fathers and sons and husbands, who have normal cares and concerns. And we try to connect at that human level, because it allows us to lead together without forgetting the imago Dei in one another. And without that, I think boards can start feeling just hyper functional. Like this is just about functionality. We just got to like success or whatever. The other thing
That's
I would
so
say
good,
that
Jay.
it's been so helpful for us. We got this from somebody, John and Nancy Ortberg actually sat with our board a number of years ago as I was stepping into the role, and they were just coaching us on some things. And then Nancy said this thing that literally gets repeated now, like at least once every board meeting in a positive way. She looked at our board and she said, listen, the best way that you can support, and then she points at me, the best way you can support this young man is to be a board that is noses in and fingers out. And what she meant by that was, if you imagine being in the kitchen, Jay and the executive team and the staff, they're cooking, but you're in the kitchen smelling. And you need to be able to say, this smells wrong, or this smells sour, or this is spoiled.
Something's burning here. Yeah.
Something's burning. You need to name it. But fingers out, like you're not actually cooking. You are watching the cooking happen and naming it and protecting and guarding and upholding the meal, And one of the things that really works is like, that was not hard for our board. Our board was like, yes, that's exactly it. That's what we want to be for Jay and for this leadership team and for this church. And they've been that, So I actually have a board meeting tonight, and you and I have talked about this. I have so many pastor friends who, when they talk about boards and their board meetings, they're like, oh man, another board meeting. And I just like, man, my heart breaks for them. Because honestly, Glenn, and you've met, the chairman of our board, like, I'm like, I look forward to tonight.
Totally.
I look forward to being with these guys. And so that's my hope
I
and
love
prayer
that.
for probably most pastors listening. Yeah.
Man, that's amazing. Wow. Okay, speaking of hope and prayer, this is the perfect way to end. Would you just take a moment here, Jay, and pray for our listeners? They could be board members who are listening to this. They could be church leaders. They could be pastors themselves in a variety of roles. But yeah, let's take a moment to pray.
Yeah, I would love to. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we thank you for the gift of life, that you have breathed life into us and into the men and women that we serve alongside, and into the men and women who call our churches home. We consider it just an unfathomable gift and privilege that you've called us in this time, for this season, for however long, to serve and to steward and shepherd and love and lead these men and women that you've entrusted into our care. And we acknowledge that this isn't my church or our church, this is your church. And so we want to make you the center of all things, Jesus. So for the leaders who are listening or watching right now, I pray by your Spirit that you would fill them with the courage and the strength, and maybe for those who need it, the comfort that comes and flows from you, from the life that you have to offer. We pray for leaders who are tired and weary, and we pray for leaders who are full of joy and hope and anticipation, and for the leaders who are just trudging along on that long plateau of leadership life. We just pray that you would meet them exactly where they are, and that you would give them exactly what they need for your glory and for the good of their churches. And we pray these things, Jesus, in your name. Amen.
Amen. Jay, it's such a delight to talk to you, man. As ever, a fountain of wisdom. Thanks for your time.
Oh, man. Thanks for having me. So fun.
Well, Glenn, that was a great conversation you had with Jay. Thanks for doing that. And thanks for joining us, everyone, for another episode of the Resilient Pastor Podcast. As always, we'd love to hear how these conversations are hitting you. So please shoot us a comment on social media. Leave us a review with your thoughts. And we're praying for you. We'll catch you next time on the Resilient Pastor Podcast.